Well, hi, uh, hi, hi, and welcome back to Have I Told You the One About My Father's Funeral? As you know, every day at 8 p.m. Pacific time, I tell a live story, and at the end of each story, I draw, and today's story is my father's funeral. This is my husband, Francis. He's my silent partner in crime. He's joining me today because it's my birthday. I'm wearing my birthday crown. Oh, yeah, look, we even have it's a party. Thanks for coming to my party. 49. Ooh, this is what 49 sounds like. Okay, that's the party. The strange thing about turning 49 during an a pandemic, is you glad he's here, is you end up with only two people at your party. So you make do and you invite all your friends to watch. So I really appreciate people who are out there because this would be very lonely without you. Anyways, you know what I mean. You can't hear me, but I can't hear you, but you can hear me, which is kind of the ideal party for me, actually, because I'm such a fucking talker who wants to do anything but uh, talk. Well, clearly you want to listen. So I'm glad there are two different kinds of people in the world. It's my 49th birthday today, and this is a very big story, obviously. My father's funeral is a big story. And I just want to make room for closeness. Here's the deal. If this is an exercise in closeness, in proximity, and trying to bridge the digital gap to feel more like we are in the same place, it can't all just be fun. I've learned this as a young fag who used to be just entertaining in the bars. I realized that you can't just entertain all the time in order to meet somebody and have romance, because people don't trust just jokes. People trust vulnerability and tenderness. And so today we're going to practice some of that. So it feels we're going to practice our closeness by me being vulnerable and tender. And so I'm going to tell you the goddamn story about my father's funeral. Um, Also, seemed really ironic because yesterday, I knew it was my birthday, and Francis, my gorgeous husband with the mustache, is here, and he's going to pick a story from the magic story bag. And he pulls my father's funeral, and I was thinking to myself, oh, are you kidding me? Like, my father's funeral for my birthday, and I'm sequestered at home? That's shit. But then I realized, what is more interesting or more profound, I guess, or holds the way the world works better than a birth and a death? And so it's the perfect day to have this kind of story. And I also thought, because I'm a little witchy, I also thought this is a visitation. My dad can have a hand in moving the cards, so he materializes and says, "Hey, kiddo, I'm still here." He used to call me Sunny Boy, actually. Hey, Sunny Boy. Look at me, Dad. Woo! I wonder if he'd be watching if he wasn't watching. If he wasn't in the world watching, I wonder if he would be watching. At any rate, here we are in this cultural moment trying to bridge the gap and have a greater sense of closeness. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And because I'm becoming a YouTube star, I have been instructed to say share, like, and subscribe. Anyways, there you go. Can't see your crown. That's okay. Everybody knows who the queen is here. um, so, my father's funeral. I'm going to start.
Okay. Well, I'll see you later.
Okay. Where are you going?
Just out there.
He didn't want to stay for the story, so
He knows the way.
that's our deal. Uh, I thought maybe because YouTube is a visual medium, I thought I would start with a little photograph. Here is my dad and his mom, my grandmother. Uh, I don't know what party this is at. That's probably somewhere in the 80s. Anyways, my dad took in his mother's footsteps, and he was a really big drinker. Maybe I know my uncles are watching this, but don't hate me. My grandmother once, my grandfather decided it was time for her to go sober, so he poured all the alcohol down the sink. This is family lore. I wasn't there, but he poured all the booze down the sink, and he came home and found my grandmother drinking Windex. My father fell very close to the family tree of my grandmother. Um, Here's me and my dad. That's me wearing the shirt I got when I worked at the care. Um, I don't have much hair. So, oh, people are having trouble with the volume. Well, that's interesting. Oh, I'm so glad people are telling me. Hmm. Well, isn't that shitty? There's that. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Oh, see, some people say that the sound is fine. I wonder what that is. Well, that really interferes with my celebrity screening, isn't it? There's real thing. Oh, look, there's other people saying it's okay. Well, maybe it's just some people with bad connections. I don't know. Oh, thanks for giving me. Okay, everybody's saying great and happy birthday. Anyways, when I was pumping gas, and that was, oh, I was saying that was before, that was when I was losing my hair, which is why I love to wear a wig. And it was before I started shaving it. So, not the most flattering picture, but I thought it would be nice to show them together. So, my dad was a terrible drunk, and was, a very blue collar, small town, working in a mill town, working in a mill, industrial mill. Um, and he got diabetes whenever he was older. He got late onset diabetes. All of his dad had it. His my great uncles, his uncles had late onset diabetes, all from drinking. Mostly. And dad ended up, he got so bad he couldn't live at home anymore, and he ended up in the Ottawa General Hospital. Um, uh, it was a very long and ugly death. It took him a really long time to die. He was close to death sometimes, and then he just decided not to. Like, I heard him say to the doctors, when the palliative care people came to see him, and overheard him from the hallway say, "I'm not ready to die. I don't know why I'm not ready to die. I'm just not." And I was like, Jesus, buddy, what do you mean you don't know you're not? He was quite suicidal in his lifetime. You know, just like me, but I'm a lot better now. So, to give you a sense of who my dad is, I want to tell you uh, two things off the get go. The first is, my dad told me this amazing story. He was out at his favorite bar, Chez Louise, where he would just drink every night. He'd go there and hang out with his buddies. And he had this one guy who he didn't know very well, but they hung out a few times. Like, he was just a guy in the bar and they were drinking. And dad had broken his top plate of his teeth, his dentures. He had both sets of teeth pulled out. And he was talking to this guy, and he was sort of nodding his head, and the guy looks at him and he says, "Well, maybe I can help with that." And they're both pissed drunk. And dad says, "Okay, how can you help?" And he said, "Well, I'm an undertaker. You should come with me." And anyways, it was very confusing. They hopped in a cab. I hope to God somebody didn't drive them. I'm making this up. They hopped in a cab and they went to this guy's funeral parlor, and they went into the basement, into the little room where they do all of the work of draining the bodies and replacing the fluid. And he goes into the other room and he pulls out a bucket full of teeth, dentures from corpses, and said to dad, "You can try on any pair you want. And if they fit you, they're yours." Dad told me the story, and I was like, when you have an alcoholic in the family, you probably know this. They tell you things as a manipulative tool. Like, there's always an agenda. They don't just tell you something to tell you something. That wasn't an entertaining story. That story was trying to tell me that he was so poor he was willing to try on the teeth of the dead. I didn't have any money at the time. I couldn't help him, but I had curiosity. So I said, "Well, how did you know, like, what teeth were what teeth? Like, how did you know which were a set?" He was like, "Oh, well, there was an elastic band around them, and some of them were in a baggie." And what I forgot to ask was, were they cleaned? Did they get cleaned or did they just get dumped in the bucket? Like, are those the teeth pulled from the body? Probably from the body of some dead people. Some of them might have been had the teeth out already. Anyways, oh, oh. So that's my funny story about my father. And the other thing I want to tell you is when I had to pack my dad's apartment up, dad lived in dad lived in some really scary situations. Like he was this close to being homeless. Had a very cold fall one year when he was living in a tent camper, and it got into November and he still didn't have a place to stay and there was no heater in the tent camper. He was that kind of alcoholic sometimes. And he ended up having different girlfriends and he moved from place to place and lived in the tent camper. And then he ended up in a few different places. And then finally he got into rent controlled housing in a tiny little town called Brockville. And when we moved my dad into the hospital and it was clear he was never going to get out, there was no point in him paying rent for a place he wasn't living, or he wasn't getting out anytime soon, because he was in the hospital for a year and a half before he died. And I, very wisely, when I was home in Cornwall, Brockville's about 40 minutes away, said, "Oh, well, I'll go pack up dad's apartment." While, because my sister had been doing all this work to take care of him, because she lived an hour away from, he was in the Ottawa General, Cornwall's an hour away. So she would drive up on every single day dad was in the hospital, every week dad was in the hospital. My sister drove on all of her free days out of the week to visit him, an hour there and an hour back, 2 days a week. She didn't get a weekend because she was taking care of my dad. She did that for a year and a half. And one weekend when I was home, she didn't want to go. And she was like, "Do you mind if I don't go?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me? My sister is a saint." Shout out to my sister. Yo. Um, anyways, dad finally got into this rental place and I decided I was going to go by myself. Worst decision of my life. Honestly, it was one of the worst things I've ever done in my entire life. If your parent dies, do not go or gets put in a home even. He was still alive when I went. But do not go to their home and pack up their entire pathetic life into boxes because you start seeing how poor your father actually is, how little he actually owns. You see all the food that's in the cupboard that he is never going to eat again. You see the stuff in the fridge and you think, what am I going to do with that? You see all of his things that you wish you wouldn't have seen, like, like his underwear and just stuff you don't want to see. It was and I did it alone and I was an hour away from anybody and I was a wildly compulsive person at the time because I had my own history of mental illness and compulsion and paranoia and terrification from being a young homosexual who was raised in Cornwall, Ontario. Anyways, I did that by myself and it was shit, let me tell you. Shit. But uh, my dad moved all those times and got kicked out of girls' places, women's places, and all of that. And when I was going through his stuff, I found my high school graduation notice that my grandma Cooper put in the newspaper, which is why her name is first. Curtis, Jesse. So hysterical. But dad kept this. All those times he moved and got kicked out of the house, like sometimes I know what it must have been like. They were throwing his things out the window. Uh, and he had my high school graduation. Look at all the goddamn hair I had. And I cut it. It was down past my shoulders. Anyways, he had that in his possession. And he also had this, which he got from his grandma Cooper. This is a drawing I drew. Was I in grade 5? I should have looked in advance. Grade 4. Here's little Michael V. Smith, the yet to be faggot. Grade 4. That was 40 years ago. I would have been 9. Oh my God, that's so crazy. There's me 40 years ago. Jesus. Dad had that. He got it from my grandma Smith. She had it. And the little thing says, "Fine weather for a circus," right? And it was like, "Hi, hi, ho, ho." Oh no, maybe that says homo. Oh my God, I was telegraphing. Anyways, dad had that. And he also had a story, the very first story I ever wrote in grad school. Is that right? Grad school, 20 some years. He carried that story around with him. He asked to read it, and I printed out a copy and gave it to him, and he had it on him. I tell you, I bawled like you would not believe. When you grow up a gay guy in a, my dad never touched me. We would thumb wrestle. He would wrestle me sometimes. He would, like, do that thing where you grab your thumbs and he'd hold them together and you couldn't get apart. But he never held me. I never sat in his lap. I didn't do any cuddly, tender things with him. When I moved to university, I started hugging him hello and goodbye, like when I would see him and when I'd been away and when I'd leave. And when my parents broke up, anyways, I'm telling you more, but what else do you have to do except listen to my story? When my parents broke up, dad would sit at the kitchen table and we'd visit for 2 hours and he'd cry the whole time. And it never occurred to me to give him a hug that whole time. It never occurred to me. It was when I was writing my memoir that it suddenly dawned on me, like, oh, I could have just like consoled him physically, but we didn't have that vocabulary in my family. It just didn't exist. So when you're a fag and you grow up and you've got a dad like this and you realize that he actually loves you and you've got concrete proof of this thing he carried around that he thought was precious, it was really trippy because it was an insight into my father that he just wouldn't never have told me. And I was finding it on my own because I was packing up his place because he was dying and he was in the hospital. Like, man, that was some serious shit. Anyways, so let's just fast forward a little bit and say he didn't do very well in September of that year. That was when I packed his place up. It was June, something like that. And in September of that year, dad's diabetes was so bad. He had lost circulation in his legs. That's why he's mostly in the hospital. And he had to get his leg amputated. One day I went to visit him in the hospital and the blanket moved off of his leg and I saw these like coin sized, like dimes, quarters, loonies, toonies sized black marks on his legs, which the blackness looked like dried mud that had cracked and caked, but it was black and not brown. And that was his flesh rotting because it wasn't getting enough circulation. It was harrowing. So dad had his leg amputated. They were quite they were quite uncertain as to whether he would survive it because he had all kinds of problems from the late diabetes and all the years of drinking and all the years of smoking. And he managed to live through the night. They did a really good job. He was really great on the operating table. Uh, I went back to my hotel room, which was right next door, and I was staying at the Rotary Hotel next to the Rotary Center puts it up or whatever, the Rotary Lodge or whatever. They pay for part of it, so it was really cheap, but it's cinder block. Anyways, I was staying in that hotel, being very compulsive. And the next morning after dad's surgery, like I went home and I tried to sleep. And uh, in the morning, I show up at the hospital and dad's had his leg removed, right? So it's the first time I'm going to see him. And I remember walking into the room and my sister was there and my brother-in-law, they got there before me. And dad was still asleep. He was on the drugs. And underneath, he was, there was the white blankets over top of him, the white sheets in the hospital bed. And dad looked like, you know, he'd been hit by a truck and drained of color, and the stump of his leg was moving in his sleep, and so it kept raising the sheet and going down and then coming up a little and going down, and it was about the size of a large watermelon, right? Lifting and going down and moving while he's sleeping. I mean, you can't write shit like this. You can't make this stuff up. This stuff is just the shit you live. Closeness. We're practicing closeness. So dad wakes up, whatever. I know we're getting to his funeral, but this is the stuff so you know who dad was, because that's the story. Uh, Dad wakes up. He has a terrible time. It's a long story, but they weren't prepared for him to get painkillers, and dad didn't tell anybody that he needed painkillers because he told us afterwards that he didn't want to disturb anybody. And we were like, dad, you're in the hospital, they're here to take care of you, that's why you're here. So you're not disturbing them, you're helping them do their job. And he was just so self-effacing, he couldn't believe it. And Lisa was my sister was sitting there, and my brother-in-law, and dad ended up in excruciating pain, and he was baying like an animal that you'd hit at the side of the road. Baying. I'd never heard a sound like it. I will never hear a sound like it again if I am a lucky man. Baying with pain. And what do you do, right? What do you do? And I had this whole dialogue going on in my head. That was 7 years ago. So I was 42. And I was talking to myself saying, look, you're a new person. You're this adult. You're a gay man. You know how to take care of people. You know what to do when people are suffering. You're not the person you were as a child. This is your father. He's in a remarkable situation. Just walk to the side of the bed and hold his hand. And I had to talk myself into holding my father's hand after he had his leg amputated. Like, the thing that fascinates me, it haunts me this moment in some ways, because what fascinates me about it is the degree to which men are taught to not take care, right? We're seeing it in this virus as it spreads around the world. They're talking about men getting sick instead of women because women know how to take care of each other and themselves and other people. And men don't. Men don't even want to accept care. Dad said to, anyways, whatever. We'll get to that. Oh man, I'm sorry. This is a hard story, but I'm glad you're here. It's my birthday, fuck. I'm 49. So I held his hand. I forgot where I was. We moved to the side. I moved to the side of the bed. I held his hand. I helped him breathe through the pain. I helped him breathe, release the pain and let the pain go and know the pain because it came in waves and know the pain was passing. And somebody's asking if my dad ever got sober before he died. He had to because he was in the hospital for a year. And we had these amazing conversations, like these conversations where I didn't even really need to say anything. It was just conversations where I told him that I loved him and he told me that he loved me. And we said it looking each other in the eyes. And so that moment, like things changed for me. Everything became, those two things were the single most healing moments of my life. Seeing the stuff that dad had kept in his apartment and holding his hand and helping him through that moment and allowing myself to be the person I was with when I wasn't with him, but I could be that person with him, and that person was helpful and that person gave him comfort. I got to parent my father a way that he probably was never parented in his life. That's fucking healing, man. That is good magic. Uh, so that was September that he lost his leg. We corresponded. I visited him every month. And my very last day of classes in November, I was driving home from a night class. It was 9 o'clock at night. And I had my grad student in the car beside me. And the phone rang from a 613 number, which is Ottawa area code. And I didn't have it programmed in my phone, so it wasn't family. And I was like, that's the hospital. And it was. And my father had died. And that was the 28th of November, but it was midnight in Ontario after midnight. So it was the 29th of November there, which is a weird little thing about time. The day he died for me is not the day he died for my sister. And I had to call my sister up, and when she answered the phone, she'd been sleeping. And I called her on the other phone. Were calling her on the phone that was turned off, so the hospital called me instead. They couldn't get a hold of her. And she said to me, am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Is this a nightmare? Because she just couldn't believe the news. And that is the hardest thing I've ever had to hear in my life. Anyways, I love my sister, and I'm glad I took that phone call first, because that would have been a shit way for her to find out if it wasn't me who was calling. So dad died. He wanted his body cremated. We cremated him, and the story is my father's funeral. So here's my father's funeral. My sister and I went to see the priest. There's just the two of us. We went to see the priest, and when we were meeting, Lisa knew him, and I didn't. And when we were meeting him, he was asking questions like, do you want this? Do you want that? And he was like, how about a eulogy? And my sister was like, I don't think I want a eulogy. And I was like, well, I don't want to like claim the eulogy as my own. but I want to speak at my dad's funeral. Like, I want to talk at his funeral. I'm a writer, I'm a fucking talker. And so I want to talk at his funeral. And so they said, sure. Like, Lisa, my sister's great. She said, sure, you could talk at dad's funeral. So I wrote this story, you know, uh, about him. I wrote a eulogy. Um, and when we went to the funeral home, I remember all kinds of people coming in. I had all my uncles came. My uncles shook my hand. My dad had four brothers. Oh, do you know what I wanted to tell you? Here's an interesting detail. I'm just going to lighten it up a little bit for a minute. Dad was born on August 7th, 1949, and his next brother, Pat, was born August 7th, 1950, and his third brother, Larry, was born August 7th, 1951. Three boys, 3 years in a row to the day. And I like to say that my dad was born with some magic, right? He was the firstborn of three boys born on magical dates. And all of that magic did not know what to do with itself in the life my father had been given. And some magics just need to get out. Some of the other people who came, I remember my dad's friend Jerry. I always called him, well, as an adult, I called him One Legged Jerry because Jerry only had one leg. They worked together for years, and Jerry lost his leg when he was, I think, a preteen jumping a train and missed, slipped, and fell underneath the wheels of the train and lost his leg. One Legged Jerry. He was really handsome when he was younger, and he still looked great. He was 60, almost 70 years old, and he came in, he shook my hand, he had a big, firm handshake, and it was very impressive. One Legged Jerry came. I was really, and they hadn't worked together in, I don't know, 20 years. It was really nice that he came. Anyways, so uh, and I had two friends who were there. My friend Matt, who's a newspaper reporter in Ottawa, and he was this cute boy that I was always trying to pick up when we lived in Vancouver, but he became a really good friend. He came, took the day off work so he could come to my dad's funeral in Cornwall from Ottawa because he knew that I didn't have many friends left in Cornwall. It was so sweet. And my friend Kathy Renault, oh, I won't say her last name because maybe that's terrible. I'm trying not to say last names. My friend Kathy, whose name starts with a Ra, Kathy took the day off work too, and she came to Cornwall, and she was living in Toronto, so she came quite a long way, and she was my prom date in grade 12 prom. And she made me buy an orange boutonniere and an orange tie to match her orange dress. Well, it was peach, a peach tie and a peach boutonniere and a peach dress. And at that prom, there was another Kathy who wore the exact same goddamn dress. Two Kathys in the same peach dress. So my Kathy didn't dance hardly at all night. It was really sad. But she called me today to wish me happy birthday. You know why? Because I'm a loyal friend, and I've kept her around since grade 7, or maybe it was grade 9. Anyways, Kathy's amazing. Hi, Kathy. Shout out. So the two of them came to my dad's funeral. And because, whatever, it's my story time and I can do what I want, I thought, I'm just going to read you. This story is my father's funeral. So I'm just going to read you my eulogy. Like, why even memorize it? Why and then you'll get some little things. And I promise it's going to end nicely. Oh, and you know what I want to also say, which I was thinking about? The odd thing about having a birthday by yourself, and also at my dad's funeral having this weird, anyways, I'm saying this kind of backwards, but I had this experience of living in BC for 20 some years and going home for my father's funeral, and my sister and my mom and people knew other people there that weren't just family. They had other people they knew, and I didn't have my own people there, so having those two friends there was really important. They're the only two friends who witnessed me burying my father. They're the only two people who heard me, like my only two friends in my regular life who heard me deliver this eulogy. And I realized when this got drawn, I thought, oh, if I read that eulogy, I'll have all the people who are watching this story participate on my birthday as a kind of weird gift of seeing this thing, right? Hearing this eulogy. So you get to be witnesses to this moment. And that's kind of really freaking nice in its own magical way. And that was 7 years ago, And I'm 49, and that's the square root of seven. 7 times 7. It's a whole bunch of sevens. And that 40, I was 7 years old when that picture was taken. Oh my goodness, look at the magic of that. I didn't even realize it. This is live TV, bitches. This is exciting. Anyways, here's the eulogy. So it's not really a eulogy, it's the speech that I wanted to give. I wanted to talk at my dad's funeral, and so it's the talk, but it became the eulogy because we didn't have a eulogy, right? I wanted to speak today of my father's service because, as a writer, it's a way I know to honor the things of the world that I love. Let it be known that I loved my father. My favorite story of Dad took place at Chez Louise, where he used to drink and play pool on their one table. Dad watched this young guy hog the pool table all afternoon. Men would come in wanting to play together, but this kid kept winning and refused to take his name off the chalkboard, so everyone had to play him instead of getting in a round with each other. Eventually, Dad had had enough, and he told me he put his name on the board to play this guy. Now, Dad left a long pause after he said this line because he loved to tell a story in little pieces. He'd give you cliffhangers to make you ask what had happened. So you'd ask him questions. And so I said to him, following his lead, I said, "So, was he any good?" And Dad answered, looking at me out of the corner of his eye, he said, "Not good enough." One of my favorite stories about my dad. Here are a few things I know about my father: that he liked the Toronto Maple Leafs and not the Montreal Canadiens, though he used to like the Montreal Canadiens. That in the 70s, his friends from the CB club, they called him Dirty Ernie. That the last time he took me fishing was for a work derby at Columbia, the mill he worked at, and I caught the biggest perch and won a rod and reel, but he didn't catch a thing. It's just coincidence we never fished together again. That maybe the fish I caught at his derby wasn't a perch. And Dad, he would know. It's the kind of thing he'd remember. That he was a great worker and a darn good shop steward because he believed in fairness and honesty and doing a job well. That he drank too much and threw up once in the all-white Monte Carlo. That wasn't my most popular line, but it's a big family story, white Monte Carlo. That one winter he gave his warm coat away to someone who needed it more than he. That he loved me, that he loved my sister Lisa and my brother in law Roland, that he loved his granddaughter Natasha and grandson Ethan, that he loved my mother, and he loved Rose, his ex girlfriend, and her family, that he missed his parents, but especially his own mother. He missed her most of all, and that he loved his brothers, all four of them. That one time when a plate of, that one time when a plate of his dentures were broken, he met an undertaker in a bar, both of them drinking until they went back to the funeral home so Dad could try on old dentures that the undertaker had collected in a bucket. None of them fit properly. I said that at his funeral. Why not? It's a funeral. You talk about the funeral home. That night, after he lost his leg, he cried alone in the hospital till he couldn't cry anymore, but nobody heard him, he said. He didn't want to disturb anyone. The poet Ted Hughes, in a now famous letter to his son, said that your vulnerability is like a child inside you. It needs nurturing and mentoring. It needs to be let out to enjoy the sun. He finishes that letter saying, the only calibration that counts is how much heart people invest, how much they ignore their fears of being hurt or caught out or humiliated. And the only thing people regret is that they didn't live boldly enough, that they didn't invest enough heart, didn't love enough. Nothing else really counts at all. I know my father didn't let love in, didn't trust himself or others, didn't feel safe enough to put down his armor very often. He said as much to my sister in these last weeks, that he kept his distance on purpose, which was a mistake of his own judgment from his own fears. I know his heart was fierce and unwieldy. He had a rich interior life, so much so that he didn't know how to handle it, what to do with it, where to put that fear and love he felt for the world. So he poured it into a cold glass and drank it down day by day. Love is a sickness if you don't share it. I have great comfort knowing my Father is free from those worries, knowing he is free to love us in the manner he wished he could while he was alive, knowing he is free to be the man he wished he could be. In these last months, he has loved us better than he was able to before. He let us in when he was terrified in the hospital and suffering with pain, and you can't imagine what a gift his openness was to me. I am profoundly grateful and changed by that. Through his struggle, I came to know my father as the hero I had wished him to be, not for his strength, nor his courage, nor by any test of manhood, but because of his willingness to be vulnerable, because he admitted to that terror, and then let me hold his hand as some company through it. Dad didn't text me often in his final months, and rarely without prompting, but he sent me a final note last week out of the blue, which I think gives a great insight into what kind of man he was. Ever the smart aleck, our exchange went like this. Hi, Mick. He called me Mick. Hi, Mick. Are you still upset over the closing of the Twinkie factory? This major Twinkie plant closed. I answered, haha, you're hysterical, you old bugger. You doing well? I'm still hunting a ticket for Christmas. He replied, I heard you want to get a job running the factory where they are made. I'm going to knock your lights out, I wrote. I ain't got no lights, he said. They are all burnt out. Haha, you're cheeky today. I love it. I'm still chuckling about Twinkies. Well, I know how much they meant to you, he replied. So cry if you like. That was the last thing my dad ever texted me. So that was my speech, with his brothers sitting in the pews looking at me, and my mom, his ex-wife, and my sister, and everybody else, and me thinking, was that terrible? I have no idea. Who cares? Whatever. It was fine. And after the service, the things finished. After the service, we had to go line up, just like at a wedding. You line up so everybody who comes in for the food afterwards can shake your hand and say my condolences and stuff. So we did that, and people came through, and I got hugs, and it was nice to see all my cousins. And then Jerry, one-legged Jerry, came up and shook my hand, and he still had a firm grip. And he looked at me and he said, it was a bass. And I was like, what? He was like, the fish. The fish was a bass. You caught a bass that day. Oh, that's one of the best gifts of my life, just to get that story right, because that was a really good story. That was a good day with my dad. I teased him my whole life about catching that big fish and him catching nothing. So that is my father's funeral. Thanks for joining me on my birthday for what was not a chipper story, but God help us, or Goddess help us. I'm glad you were here, because I'm a little less alone. Okay, we're going into, I gotta cut this cord off, right? I'm going into the magic story bag. Please, magic story bag, bring Michael V. Smith something fun for tomorrow. I'm tired of these Debbie Downers. Okay, what's this one? Oh, tomorrow is Lisbon's Hotel Principe Real. That is a really good story. Tell your friends, share it. I don't know, whatever. Wish me happy birthday again if you want. But I just want to invite you to participate in closeness through your e-communications and wash your hands. Love you. Bye.